The more evidence, the better, I say.
I mean, this is so improbable.
That's a bold statement.
I mean, I think that's a fair point, but I didn't make that argument. He did.
Why is that true? Is that a good question? Maybe it's not.
Drew, you're not supposed to ask good questions like that.
Sorry.
Ask difficult questions.
Bill, jump in here.
I'm Bill the Christian.
And I'm Drew the Skeptic.
You're listening to The Divide.
All right, we're with Stephen again. He's rejoined us for a conversation. We've talked to you before, Stephen. You identify as an atheist. Welcome again.
Thanks, good to be back.
Studying neuroscience, if I remember, and heading to med school. So we nearly converted you last time, as I recall, Stephen. Drew and I together.
Sure.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
So I guess that has left in me this question, left in my mind this question. What would it take for you to become a Christian?
It's an interesting question. I'm gonna start out by talking about kind of my own journey through this whole question.
Okay.
So I grew up in a conservative, Southern Baptist home, very fundamentalist. Sunday or church. Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Wednesday evening type of a deal. And I was also homeschooled all the way from second grade through high school. Mm-hmm. And I was in a private Christian group type thing where I was we were taught creationism and we had theology class in high school. Mm-hmm. And it was the whole shebang. But eventually kind of what happened is I got really into science, and I just as I learned more about science, and so much of it was incompatible with I thought it was incompatible with what I had learned already. I mean, a lot of that was due to the fact that I was brought up a creationist. Who knows what would have happened if I was brought up into a family that was okay with evolution,
or liberal
as
Christian,
right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, who knows what would have happened? But
I'm semi-okay with some of evolution, and usually don't describe myself as a liberal.
Yeah, well,
okay, fair enough. Liberal compared to the Southern Baptist.
Sure.
All right.
Yeah. Well, especially because I've never been. It's not like I was exposed to every single argument for both sides before I changed my mind. And once I did change my mind, you kind of look at it from a different perspective. Mm-hmm. I stayed really far the science end of the spectrum and didn't really pay much attention to the philosophical arguments until afterwards. Mm-hmm. When it was kind of
was this high school or started university?
Last 2 years of high school, because it was kind of a gradual process. Over
Not a
time.
Particular teacher or adult or
no,
anyone
it was just me on my own. I actually had one friend that challenged me on specific beliefs that I had a couple times, and a lot of the stuff where I really started changing my mind is when I was researching things to argue against him. Mm-hmm. But what I was finding was not helpful for my side. It was contrary. Mm-hmm. So eventually it was just too much, and I was just no, this is...
Okay. Did you feel like you were arguing about trying to defend, say, 6,000-year-old Earth and things like that?
I mean, that's how it started. I mean, because the thing is, when you grow up as a creationist, they try to tie the whole thing together. And they say, without the young Earth, there's no room for the fall and all this stuff. The whole, if this part of it is false, then who's to say any of it's true? And they try to keep you a creationist by bundling the whole religion together. And so when evolution fell, it took the whole structure with it.
Okay, so you felt like that essentially you went down the slide.
Yeah, that's how it really started.
Well, that's interesting, and kind of comes back to the original question: is have you since considered whether or not if you didn't believe that brand of religion, if there was something there to be had.
Had you been exposed to Biologos, this Christian organization of pretty serious academics who clearly
believe in
advocate
evolution.
for evolution.
If you could believe in evolution.
Francis Collins.
Maybe. I don't know. It's
so that's not something that you've revisited.
It's such a different mindset, I think. I think it would be such a different mindset that I don't even know. But then again, I mean, one of my close friends, he started out as very similarly to me, and then he was a theistic evolutionist for a while, and then he eventually just turned into a deist and then an atheist. He had the whole progression, but it was more drawn out than mine was. So I mean, me and him are similar enough that that might have happened to me too.
He went down
Like,
cataracts and you just went down Niagara.
Yeah, pretty much.
Well, that's interesting. I was just curious if you had revisited it, you know, and
Yeah, I mean-
a form of religion that would allow you to believe in evolution, you know.
I haven't like looked into it too deeply because like as I started studying the other aspects and I got into the philosophical arguments, like I thought they favored atheism like
Okay.
in general. So
Well, that's a good background.
yeah,
How did you want to take the main question from there?
Well, I suppose since you were especially interested in science and had and still have a love for science, neuroscience, and so on, I suppose that opens up lots of possibilities in the scientific world that would make me think you might pause nowadays a little bit later and think, you know, maybe some of these scientific issues would be better resolved on the idea of God than they would on atheism. So there's fine-tuning, there's consciousness, there's Big Bang, and so on. So why don't we start with just fine-tuning as something which, for the listeners, this is the idea, right, that there are certain constants in the universe that allow the universe to exist as it does, and it's a little bit like a teeter-totter when someone on the other side was about your weight, and you could sort of just keep it even, and if either of you moved too much, you know, one of you would start to go down, the other one up, and that the whole universe, you know, has this what they call the flatness problem, in that there's this what's our physicists say are astronomical probabilities, no pun intended, that the universe would exist as it does and be able to sustain life.
I've heard it described less eloquently as the Goldilocks principle. You know, it's not too hot and not too cold. So
yeah, I mean, it's like an instrument. The idea of fine tuning, there's just a very narrow window in which that instrument, that string on a guitar, can be tuned.
Or in this
and the
case,
universe is
in which the universe could exist at all and sustain life.
Yeah.
And all of these things.
So it seems highly improbable, and it's not as though the universe decided to do this, and so that's sort of that's what they call the problem of fine tuning. Mm-hmm. And for the Christian, this seems like less of a problem, because the Christian can say, well, it is highly improbable. It could have been otherwise, but God is balancing the teeter.
We designed it this way because He had a choice.
yeah. Well, I mean, I guess my personal thoughts about this question is there's not like one, like, you know, knockout argument that I have, but I feel like there's lots of like little arguments or like circumstantial things almost, or at least answers to objections that I feel like in some offer a viable enough alternative that I'm not willing to posit a deity.
Very good. Why don't you lay out a couple other possibilities other than the theism one? Okay.
Well, just about these extremely fine-tuned values. I mean, just because we don't know that they're actually free to change. Mm-hmm. I mean, for all we know, they could have to stay at the values they are. Just because they wouldn't, if they changed by a small amount, it would make life impossible. It doesn't mean that they can change by that small amount. Mm-hmm. I mean, so there's that.
So you might call that a deeper law.
Yeah.
Is that essentially what that is?
I guess you could say that.
A law of necessity. It couldn't be otherwise.
Right. Just like the value of pi is exactly what it is, and it just is that way. You can't change the value of pi. It's just
all right.
the nature of it.
Can we talk about that one just for a second?
Pie?
No.
Oh, sorry. No. I'm hungry. We've done a couple of these.
Yeah. So let's talk about that one just for a second. Is it your impression that it's a common view among the physicists that there is already clear evidence that there is this deep necessity, that the constants had to be what they are?
I think if pressed, a lot of them probably would give an answer like somewhat similar to that, but I think the typical response from physicists is to just posit a multiverse and with infinite possible initial conditions, and then kind of go anthropically.
So let's stay there just for a second. It's my impression, Drew, maybe you have a different one. It's my impression that the physicists are more in agreement that the universe really could have been otherwise. That there don't seem to be any serious problems with tweaking some of the constants and seeing what the results would be, and if on the premise that the universe was undirected, granting it was undirected, then it would seem like it certainly could have turned out in lots of different ways, trillions and trillions of possibilities, and that's what makes the fine-tuning argument have so much weight. And my impression is that I don't think you're right about that, is that the physicists tend to skew toward not that there's this deep set of necessary laws that are sort of underneath it that require it. Now, I really don't know that from a poll or anything like that. So, but that's certainly a possibility, but it hasn't been my impression that that's the case. But you might have a different one, being actually a neuroscientist, and I sit around and read Homer.
I'll agree with you that I've never heard it, but I'll also defer to Stephen on the science.
I didn't come up with it myself. So
no,
I mean, that's
no. I didn't mean to say that it isn't presented as a possibility. It's a logical possibility. It's just that I don't think the physicists I've read seem to be at this point heading in that direction. They're more heading in the other direction. Which, why don't we go to the other one, which is the
multiverse one?
By the way, I would say this. If there are these deep laws that make the universe have to be as it is and can't be otherwise, it literally is the best or only possible universe. If that's the case, gosh, that would even sound better to me as being as sitting very well on theism, if it does turn out that way.
I mean, you guys leave me in the dust on this stuff. I'm not even a pseudoscientist, but it does seem like a chicken egg thing, right? Like it seems like you could have the argument, well, is it this way because it has to be, or is it this way because it was calibrated, or which came first, the calibration or the facts that it must? It's a little bit confusing to a mind such as mine, at least.
I mean, yeah. Another small objection that I have, like I was talking about, I have a list. It does not seem to me that if one was to fine tune a universe, one would end up with this universe. Just looking at the vastness of it, and just how almost the entire universe to 9 point, however many nines it is, we can't even theoretically interact with them because they're moving away faster. They're moving away from us at these ridiculous speeds. We're not even going to be able to see them. So it just seems like why do all that? Why make all that? And then all of that's inhospitable, and then all we have is this really small planet. We can only live on a third of it. And because the rest is water, we can't drink the water. And then there's volcanoes and earthquakes and tsunamis. And it's just if I was going to fine tune a planet for human life, I don't think I would end up with the Earth.
I do think that's a little different sort of problem, first of all.
It is.
Meaning it's not what you're talking about is not strictly the fine tuning problem. Now you're talking about whether the universe we have, is this really the kind of universe God would make? But let me just say this, the fact that it's a teeter-totter existence, that but that's of course, there's the probabilities are far more in favor of a teeter-totter staying level than the universe being what it is, if nothing's directing it. The problem with that, and I can see myself how God might want us to feel that we're in a universe that's on a teeter-totter. That from my perspective as a theist is yet another reminder among many others that I'm simply not in control, and that my very existence is not something I can have any power over, and it's a fragile existence that must compel me to want to depend upon God. Whether that's a satisfying response to you, again, we're now just in the realm of what satisfies us and what would be the ideal universe, but that's different from the fine-tuning argument. Right. Back to what Drew was saying, I do, one thing for me as a Christian who knows I'm capable or going to be inclined toward confirmation bias in this particular issue, is that when I go to read the physicists I've read, the ones I can understand, I sort of take courage that I'm not myself inventing this, that the fine-tuning problem is actually a problem that physicists repeatedly write about, discuss. They frequently bring the word God into the discussion, as is in their books, like Stephen Hawking's book and some of the others, Martin Rees, I think his name is, who wrote a book called Six Numbers. God becomes a part of this discussion about the fine-tuning problem in ways he doesn't when we're talking about, say, how did the eye develop in Darwin, in evolution. You're not really reading in the evolutionary books that the evolutionary biologists feel compelled to have to debate about God in terms of some aspects of the evolution, whereas with fine-tuning, it does seem to come up in the books as being a real problem that it hasn't yet been resolved. I don't think anybody claims they've resolved it. So it's not as though, Drew, like I'm inventing the problem. It seems to be a legitimate scientific thing.
I agree. I've heard it debated by the top levels, and I just have to admit that it's over my head, because to me it seems sort of like why does 2 + 2 = 4? That's awfully convenient, it just seems like, well, it just is, and the universe just is this way. It just happens to be this way. Yeah, it's even if it is unlikely, which, as Stephen said, we don't even know. I don't think we know that it's unlikely. It's just there are a lot of finely tuned knobs,
But it almost sounds like you guys are saying, I don't know why these physicists don't see that there's really... When you say if it's unlikely, I mean, no physicist says if it's unlikely, right?
To me, it's maybe a sub-question of the old, why is there anything instead of nothing? That is a more interesting question to me, but maybe it's the same question. I don't know.
I don't know.
All right, so
you're saying, you take comfort from reading the physicists and knowing that they see this as a problem. I take comfort from the fact that almost all of the top physicists are atheists and they don't see a problem with it.
I think is a good point.
I have to go on their expertise on this.
That I think is a good point. That it's true that I would surmise that the majority of physicists, I'm not sure it's a strong majority, by the way, but certainly the impression I have is that the majority of physicists are, I think from the polls and stuff, favor atheism, or at least it's half, if not more. The only 60%. I don't know what it is.
The only stat that I know is in the National Academy of Sciences. It's 85%.
Okay, so it's very high.
But I know that, but that's it's less high if you have a less exclusionary category.
Yeah. Although.
But basically, you're right, Bill. It is something that's not answered even at the highest levels, but it's also something, Stephen's saying, that's not a problem for them.
Yeah, I think that is a good point. I mean, why exactly the reason I think that point is weakened, by the way, is if it were the case that these atheists, who are let's say it's 85% even, in the Academy of Sciences, were themselves totally neutral until they researched fine-tuning, and then after researching fine-tuning, then made the decision that there was no reason to become a theist, then I would feel like that has more weight. But I highly doubt that was the case. I would bet that a lot of people's atheism was well ensconced before they thoroughly looked at
wait a minute there. Isn't that the same thing as saying from your side, if you were to come to this question or any other question with no biases, then would you still choose to be a Christian?
First of all, that would be true. I mean, I think that's a fair point, but I didn't make that argument. He did. He was the one who made the argument from that perspective, so that's why I was attacking it. So
I think he was just saying, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the way I see it is more like, if it's not a problem for them, I don't see why I should make it a problem that I have to try to solve for myself.
Well, it is a problem. It's just that they haven't resolved it, and they don't. What your point is, I think, is it hasn't convinced them to become theists.
Well, I think
that what you're trying to say?
Partially, yes, but also
I think that's a good point.
They think they have good answers to it.
And what would be the more common answer? Let's get to the other one because we haven't talked about it. Multiverse. Explain that one briefly.
Yeah, so
it's the more common explanation from what I read.
Right. So I mean, under the multiverse hypothesis, there's basically an infinite number of universes, and they could have an infinite number of starting conditions. So these values that are so fine-tuned could take all these other forms. Mm-hmm. And because there's infinite universes, there's a statistical guarantee that somewhere you're going to have a universe that's going to support our kind of life. And where else could we be but in that universe?
Yeah. All right, so that's a good explanation, I think. And but you seem less inclined toward that possibility, or is that just another possibility?
I mean, the thing is, to me, like all these like high-level physics concepts are like so far above like anything that I ever deal with that I just kind of have to go along with whatever the physicists say and trust that they're reasoning correctly.
From a complete layman's, even much more of a non-scientist than you are to some extent. I would just say that I could make up something like the multiverse, even if it's not true. And just the fact that like there are alternatives, even if they're not plausible, and I could probably make up 5 of them. Like it's just why would you go to? Well, this certainly implies a creator.
Well, first of all, I definitely don't think that. I mean, I don't think that you can say that fine-tuning implies a creator. What I would think is that fine-tuning is a serious problem in physics. And there are only what seem to be 3 logical possibilities as far as from what I read. The sort of deep laws that demand the universe can only be what it is, which I don't think there's as many in that camp. We may yet discover that's the case, but I don't think there's as many in that camp. The majority are in the it could have been otherwise camp, which means that's a really, really big problem. In fact, if you actually, when they give their mathematics, for how improbable they describe it, it's really quite extraordinary. And their options are, it's not that there's really just these 3 options. There are other options. There's the we're living in a matrix option. The whole thing is the Elon Musk option of it's a matrix. It's just that those probably aren't being discussed very much at science conferences, and I don't think many people take them too seriously. I hope for good reasons. What my argument is that on theism, fine-tuning actually gets resolved and makes sense very nicely, and it doesn't outside of that. That would be what the argument is from my perspective.
I got you. Okay.
I mean,
that makes more sense than
I don't think it's.
This directly implies a creator.
No, I don't think so. I would think of it more like
a creator would be a nice answer for this.
A creator does actually solve this problem.
Right.
A designer, the fine-tuner. With the multiverse, the reason I don't think of that as being a solution, as good as people here. For one, it's not even clear, is it, that science will ever be able to show that there are other universes. No. It's not even really clear that they'll be quite able to show that.
Right.
So, but I would agree that if that's that would solve it. Right? So you could, the pushback on me would be, well, science is never going to be able to show that God is real either, which I think is true. Yeah. I don't think science isn't in the business of being able to detect whether God is real. It's not what science is. From my perspective, it's a tool that's used to study material nature, and God, by definition, is outside of that. So,
right.
But the problem I have with multiverse is that it's true that the probability problem seems on the surface to go away, in the sense that if there's really trillions and trillions of universes, then sooner or later there's going to be one that can support life like we have, that's going to be on this teeter-totter. And so supposedly the problem goes away. But I would argue, it's not my argument, I read it in Alvin Plantinga. His response to that I thought was really good. He said, well, let's say you're playing in Vegas. Drew here once, what was it, Drew, that you won?
I won an entry to the World Series of Poker main event.
Wow.
Pretty impressive, huh?
Yeah.
So just so the listeners know,
I was even on ESPN
the level.
for 13 seconds, getting kicked out or getting knocked out of the tournament by the guy who had come in second the year before. So.
Did your family? Did you DVR this? I mean, do you have?
We did.
This?
Well, back when we had 3 generations of DVRs ago, it was on there for a while, and then it's lost to that.
It's been lost into the universe.
It'll probably be replayed in syndication for lifetimes to come.
So, Drew, you're in Vegas. And you're playing. I don't know. I don't remember. I haven't played poker much since high school. But anyway, you're playing 5-card draw or whatever. And
Texas Hold'em is the
okay. And someone else, the dealer, who I assume is playing in the hand, gets 5 royal flushes, 10 royal flushes in a row. Okay, 10 royal flushes in a row, and you say, okay, that's it. I mean, this guy's cheating, right? I mean, this is so improbable. Like the levels of improbability are so high.
I was on the fence, but the 10th one, I can't.
Yeah. So I said, the dealer responds to you and says, look, imagine there's a multiverse, and there's trillions and trillions and trillions of universes. And yes, it seems so improbable here in this universe, in Vegas, but if you believe in multiverse, then this was going to happen in some universe. It just happened, right? It just so happened that it was while you were here in Vegas tonight. Would you be satisfied by that?
That's a category error, right?
I don't think that's the same.
That's a category error because you're not talking about the fact that the universe is here. You're talking about an event that happened in the universe.
You're talking about a one-time occurrence.
It's a complete category.
We're not talking about the fine-tuning isn't that the universe is here. Fine-tuning is that the universe could have been an event that resulted in a different kind of universe.
But you're not talking about an event in the universe. You're talking about a quality of the universe. It's a category error.
Yeah, but I don't think it's a category error because maybe Plantinga just missed this. That's what happened. Okay, well, we should write him.
Here's this.
I
don't think it's a category error. It's just the idea that the universe could have turned out in lots of different ways.
Say that there's 10 trillion dealers,
of different ways.
And one of them's going to get that, and they only let you in that room.
Okay, say that again.
There's 10 trillion dealers. They're dealing a bunch of hands. And, one of them's going to get a bunch of royal flushes, and they only let you in that room.
But yes, it's the same.
When you apply the Anthropic principle to it,
this is my point.
It's just like it picks the room for you.
This is my point. Exactly. My point is, would you be satisfied with that? No.
If I knew that I could only be in that room and that I would be, inherently unable to access all other rooms, all other possibilities, yeah.
But that's exactly what the multiverse argument is. The room is just the multiverse.
I think his point highlights how Plantinga's, if we're understanding it correctly, his example is an error because what he said is actually addressing that. It's not that there's 10 trillion universes and this is the dealer we got. It's that there's 10 trillion dealers, and this is the dealer we got. Yeah, if there were 10 trillion dealers,
it's not even this is the dealer we got. It's that we could have only ever gotten this dealer.
Well, even leaving that aside, if we know that there's 10 trillion, there's going to be one where he gets 5 deuces 7 times in a row. There's going to be one where not 5 deuces. There's only 4 in the deck. There's one.
That's probably why you lost. I could imagine that the listeners would be loving all this probabilistic reasoning. So let's just say that it feels at least like multiverse could sort of explain just about any improbability. Then is the way I think Plantinga's rebuttal.
Good, yeah.
And it does seem like it could, but it doesn't feel very satisfying. In other words, you still have what he calls the problem of this universe. The problem doesn't go away.
Well, to me, it's not very satisfying to say, "Here, look, we have this fine-tuning argument. That deity resolves this. Great. Let's call it there."
Well, of course,
that's not satisfying.
Of course, I never suggested that.
Well, yeah, but I mean,
I suggested that we have that what seems to be a commonly known problem that I'm not so convinced that multiverse will satisfy, although I don't deny that it could. Yeah. And I myself have no real problem with a multiverse. It doesn't matter to me whether in the end there's a multiverse or not. I don't feel like that will deny the reality of God if the multiverse is true. I'm just saying the problem as it stands now seems to me to be resolved on theism. I don't think you would disagree with that. And that it's a problem. I think the other solutions, I don't think multiverse works as well as people tend to think. But I say that having read Plantinga, and of course I'm going to be inclined, I understand, to be favorable to it, but I just bring it out. Let me ask you something separate from this that I think is even more interesting, that's a little bit still on fine-tuning, but slightly away from our earlier question. Have you ever heard of the movie Rabbit Hole, where Nicole Kidman and Aaron Eckhart are a couple? They lose their child when I think he's 6. He gets hit in a car accident and he dies before the movie starts. And she's going through grief, obviously, and he is too, but their marriage is sort of dismantling. And she comes into contact with the teenager who accidentally hit her child and killed him. But he doesn't know it's her. And she starts to ask him about his life, and he's interested in physics and science, and he's interested in the multiverse. And as the movie progresses, she starts to read more and more of the physics and read about multiverse. And he describes to her sort of poetically the possibilities of all these universes where everything is sort of being lived out. And she starts to find comfort in the idea that her son in another universe, trillions and trillions and trillions of universes somewhere else, is alive, enjoying his life. And the movie ends with their marriage sort of reaffirming, and it's very much a kind of plug that science can sort of provide a comfort where previously people would have turned to God. What's your reaction to that? I mean, this is a major movie. Nicole Kidman and Aaron Eckhart,
Seems a little far-fetched to me. I don't know. How does it strike you?
Yeah.
Would it provide comfort? The goal of it was to provide comfort.
I mean, not
to some people, I guess.
I can see it. It would not for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
You agree that they were clearly pushing that view as if it was science offering a moral comfort.
It does seem like that, yeah.
I would say that I'm almost prejudicially concerned with this universe.
Good. Well, the problem for me is that, if their son is sitting on a beach somewhere in another universe enjoying the Caribbean, it also means he's being tortured like Gollum in yet another universe.
It does, yeah.
So it's everything bad and everything good could have happened. But I thought it was interesting that they created a movie to try and it's actually it's surprisingly powerful. So I was curious what your reaction to that would be.
It was interesting.
All right, so on this topic, it seems like the divide is that from your perspective, at least in the one thing we've discussed with science, fine-tuning, it hasn't pushed you back to theism.
Right.
For Drew, it's not a problem, or it's.
I'm content to say I don't know, and I don't feel like it really points in one way or another.
And for me, it's something that, as a theist, I find interesting that something that came out of physics at the highest levels of cosmology since the 1970s has presented a problem which is extraordinary, which everybody agrees in the world of physics is extraordinary and unique, and has actually brought someone like Stephen Hawking, who of course was an atheist, died an atheist as far as we know, nonetheless brought him to discuss the topic of God. Meaning for so many atheists, science has sort of ruled out God virtually. Whereas it's interesting to me that I obviously take some comfort that at the highest levels of science there are some issues that seem to bring up the issue of God as a resolution to it, where the other ones have not yet. There's not yet an answer. I realize I've tried to ban us from discussing gaps-type arguments because to me, every solution to an argument every argument is a gap filler by nature. So, but anyway, so I think that was very interesting. Really appreciate your thoughts on that. I'm Bill the Christian,
and I'm Drew the Skeptic. Thanks for listening.
The Divide is produced by Alan and Ben Hallbrooks and edited by John Workman. Dalton Reed handles IT. Join us for further discussion on this topic at our subreddit, TheDividebyiPUB. To learn more about other episodes and who we are, check out ipub.org/thedivide. See you next time on The Divide.